Right, our speaker today is Brother Jerry Carmichael. Jerry is a native of Mount Sterling, Kentucky. I first met Jerry a few years ago when I became director of the school here, and grew very quickly to appreciate the good work that he has been involved in for so many years, and continue to appreciate the good work that he's involved in. If I said he's a graduate of the school, I'm going to say it again because I can't remember if I said that or not. But at any rate, he's a graduate of Southeast, and he's worked in congregations in Tennessee, Kentucky, and Indiana. He's held a number of gospel meetings in the past and continues to hold 8 or so each year. He has traveled in Malaysia, Singapore, China, and Japan in doing mission work, and that's something that's so very needful, isn't it? He is the co-founder and past director of the Bluegrass Bible Institute in Northern Kentucky, and he still serves there as one of the instructors. He is an evangelist and works along with Brother Danny Murphy. Danny, he's a graduate of International Bible College, wasn't he? Isn't that right? Yeah, I remember I had Danny, and here as well. I had Danny as a student back in the 80s at Florence, Alabama, at what is now known as Heritage University. And I can't remember if I had him here or not. But anyway, he works with Danny Murphy, who's a really good man, and they have a great working relationship. And that's really important, isn't it, Jerry? You know, two men working together in the Lord's work. He is married to the former Gene Baker, and they have 2 daughters, 2 granddaughters, and 2 grandsons. And so I invite you to give your undivided attention to Brother Jerry as he brings his lesson this morning. Preach, Brother Jerry.
Thank you, David. He had never seen a flower. He'd never seen a bird. He had never seen a baby, nor read one written word. He had never seen a sunset, nor seen the sun arise, until a man named Jesus came and opened up his eyes. You've been singing about it for years. The spiritual application of our lesson this morning: Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. Well, good morning to you, and thank you for having me. It's always a great pleasure to come back here. It's always a pleasure to come back and relive old memories. Jean and I drove by where we used to live, and it's not there anymore, and we're not even sure where it was now. It's changed so much. But we enjoyed our time here as students, and we received a foundation and a blessing to get a long preaching career started. Lo, those many years ago when we started over in the old building, long before this building was even built. Be turning in your Bible. You do have your Bible, I hope. John chapter 9. We're going to talk about the first 12 verses, but we will also talk about the rest of the chapter in some detail, maybe not quite as much. John chapter 9, verse 1, as Jesus, wait a minute, let's stop. Do me a favor. Put your finger over that big black 9 and go back one verse. Go back to John chapter 8 and verse 59. I don't know why they divide these thoughts like this, but go back to verse 59. They took up stones to throw at him. But Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple, going through the midst of them, and passed by. Cover up that big 9, keep going. Now, as Jesus passed by, he saw a man who was blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, saying, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? And Jesus answered, neither this man nor his parents sinned, but that the works of God should be revealed in him. I must work the works of him who sent me while it's day. The night is coming when no one can work. And as long as I'm in the world, I am the light of the world. When he had said these things, he spat on the ground and made clay with the saliva and anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay. And he said, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which is translated sent. And so he went and washed and came back seeing. Therefore, the neighbors and those who previously had seen that he was blind said, "Is not this he who sat and begged?" And some said, "This is he." And others said, "No, he is like him." He said, "I am he." Therefore they said to him, "How were your eyes opened?" And he answered and said, "A man called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and said to me, 'Go to the pool of Siloam and wash.' And so I went and washed, and I received my sight." And they said to him, "Where is he?" And he said, "I do not know. I don't know where he is." Isn't it interesting that verse 59 says he was escaping a stoning, and he stopped on the way out of escaping a stoning to take care of another human being? Boy, is there not a lesson in there for us? I'm too busy. I don't feel well. My head hurts. I don't have the money today. Whatever it is, it could not compare to escaping a stoning to stop and help another human being. He saw a man born blind. It's noteworthy that oftentimes when Jesus made a claim to be divine, he backed it up with a miracle about the very thing that he claimed to be. If you remember, in John chapter 6, he said, "I am the bread of life," and then he fed 5,000 people with bread. In John chapter 11, he said, "I am the resurrection and the life," and then he raised Lazarus from the dead. Here he says in verse 7, "I am the light," and then he brings light to a man who had never before seen light. All, in part at least, to prove that he was who he said he was, that he was the Son of God. He is the promised Messiah. So the purpose of this miracle is to prove him to be the Son of God, and down through the years to produce faith in everybody that hears this story. And to produce faith even in this century with you and me. You remember when John concluded his book, and then he remembered he had another chapter to write and something else he needed to say. He concluded his book in John 20 and verses 30 to 31, and then he added chapter 20 and 30 and 31, and then he added chapter 21. But what he said was, in chapter 20 and verse 30, Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his apostles, but these are recorded to prove that he's the Son of God, so that you may believe, and believing you may have life in his name. Well, when I read this account of this man born blind, it increases my faith. And it has for many years. I want to approach this very academically, I guess you would say, more like a classroom is the way I like to preach and teach. And so we're going to talk about 3 facts about this miracle. Then we'll talk about 3 questions, 3 unique occurrences, and then some application. So let's get started. 3 statements of fact about this miracle. First of all, Jesus saw a man. Now, is that significant to you as it is to me? Because you know what I fall into, family, sometimes? Sometimes I'll see a big crowd of people, and you know what they look like? They look like little abstract dots of various colors and shapes and sizes. And you know what I have to do to myself? I have to realize that every one of those dots is a living, breathing, eternal soul made in the image of God. Every single one of them, the one that lives under the bridge in the cardboard box and the one that lives in the mansion, they're all made in the image of God. They're all important. And Jesus saw this man. He didn't just glance over this beggar as perhaps you and I would have. He didn't cross on the other side of the street were that to be possible. He saw him. He saw him as a person, not as just an abstract part of the crowd. He saw him as one with a physical malady that only Jesus could cure. Only Jesus. He saw him as one in whom the works of God could be revealed. That's what he said in verse 3, wasn't it? And we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail later on. But he saw him as an opportunity to bring glory to God and at the same time help somebody. You remember Matthew 5 and verse 16, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works, but bring glory to your Father who's in heaven. And that's what he wanted to do. That's what he did with his entire ministry. He brought glory to God. He saw him as a potential, productive, important part of the human race. Now, sometimes we don't, do we? Sometimes I don't. I'm not speaking for you. Sometimes I think they're never going to amount to anything. And sometimes I don't think they're ever going to be productive and useful and important. You have to change that kind of thinking. You have to say, straighten up. That's a human being. That's a human being made in the image of God. And Jesus saw that with this beggar. He saw him as one who needed help. Love values other people. You know that. You're Christians. Love places a high value on other people. So the first thing I want us to notice about this account of Jesus healing this man born blind is Jesus saw him. He saw a man whom the rest of us would perhaps have overlooked. The second thing I want to notice, this man was stone blind. He had never seen in his entire life. The reason I say that so emphatically is I actually talk to people who try to explain away and dismiss these miracles, these signs. You can't dismiss this. Anthropon ek genethes tuflon. Anthropon, man. Genethes, genetics, Genesis, born. Tuflon, without sight. A man born without sight. Didn't have cataracts. He wasn't nearsighted. He wasn't farsighted. He didn't have blurred vision. He was blind. He couldn't even see the man who put the clay on his eyes to heal him. Now, blindness in Jesus' day was common. A lot of people were blind, and it was usually permanent and incurable. Unless it was a miraculous cure, it would have been impossible for him to find gainful employment. About the only thing he had going for him was what he was doing, begging. And somebody would have to have led him to the place, of course, where he begged. Someone would have to have done that. And you remember in Acts 9 and verse 8, when the Apostle Paul was temporarily stricken blind, they had to lead him into the city, Acts 9 and verse 8. So this man was completely blind. He couldn't see. Jesus saw him. Jesus saw that he was blind. And Jesus completely healed him. What an amazingly simple statement in verse 7. He said to him, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which is translated sent. And so he went, he washed, he came back seeing. And in verse 9, some said, this is he. Others said, he is like him, and I am he. Therefore they said, how were your eyes open? Verse 11, he answered and said, a man called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and said to me, go to the pool of Siloam and wash. I went, I washed, I received my sight. Have you ever thought about this? He was completely healed. He went, he washed, he received his sight. You know what healed him? Grace plus spit plus dust plus obedience. Grace, spit, dust, and obedience. Now, is that when you go down to your vision center and you go in and you tell the doctor, I'm really having trouble seeing, would you spit in my eye? That's not the cure for blindness. Just like walking around and around a wall and screaming at the top of your lungs is not the cure, not the way to make a wall fall down. Dipping 7 times in the Jordan's not the way to cure leprosy. You know the point of all of it. God did it. God did it. Grace, spit, dust, and obedience. It was genuine. It was a genuine healing. He was completely healed. And that's affirmed by the man himself in verse 25. Notice he answered and said, whether he's a sinner or not, I do not know. One thing I know, though I was blind, now I see. He is completely healed, and it's attested to by, affirmed by the man. It was affirmed by his parents in verse 20 when they were asked, is this your son, and was he born blind? And his parents answered to them, verse 20, we know that this is our son and that he was born blind, but by what means he now sees we do not know, or who opened his eyes we do not know. He's of age, ask him, he'll speak for himself. In verse 8, his neighbors knew that he had been healed. The neighbors and those who previously had seen that he was blind said, is this not he who sat and begged? In verse 15, even the Pharisees affirmed that he could see by asking him, how were your eyes opened? They'd already been proven that he had been blind. Everybody was telling them, this is that guy. This is the one who was sitting out there begging, and this is him, and now he's obviously able to see. They saw clearly that his eyes were opened, and he could see now. No surgery, no cornea transplant, no glasses, no cataracts, cataract removal, spit, dust, grace, and obedience. The thing that you're facing now in your life, that thing in your life, we all have them. You can't see how it's going to be fixed. You cannot see how it's going to be repaired. It might be something as simple as grace, spit, dust, and obedience. God will take care of it. Trust him to do so. The results, the man could see, verses 6 and 7. And this right here would have been worth the price of admission for me, family. Verse 13 through 16, the Pharisees were upset and divided. he shook them up. And that would have been worth the price of admission right there. This man can see. Oh, it couldn't possibly have been a man from God because it was on the Sabbath, and it couldn't possibly have been, and on and on. And some believed and some didn't, and God wouldn't hear him if he were. That's worth the price right there to get the Pharisees all tangled up among themselves. Another thing that was a result is the man was reviled and disfellowshipped. In verse 22, his parents said these things because they feared the Jews, for the Jews had agreed already that if anyone confessed that he was Christ, he would be put out of the synagogue. And so obviously that would apply to this man as well. Then in verse 34, they answered and said, you who were completely born in sins, and you're teaching us, and they cast him out. Another result of this complete healing. What's the point, preacher? Well, sometimes when God works out your problem, sometimes when you come out on the other side, the reaction of others may not be exactly what you expected it to be. It may not always be, oh man, I'm glad for you. It just may not always be the case as it was with this fellow. Then, 3 questions. Who sinned? In chapter 9 and verse 2, when they come out of this stoning, potential stoning, and they stop and talk to this man, his disciples asked, saying, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Do you realize, sweet family of God, that is still a prevalent belief? It is still believed by many that physical maladies and difficulties in life occur because of something the person did wrong, and in proportion to the enormity of the wrongdoing. A lot of people believe that. That was the problem Job's 4 friends had, wasn't it? All 4 of Job's friends came along and said, man, you lost everything you had. Now here you are sitting at the city dump scraping scabs off your sores with pieces of broken pottery. You must have really done something big. And Job said, well, tell me what it is and I'll repent of it. Well, we know that it wasn't Job's fault, was it? Who sinned, this man or his parents? Now, it's interesting that he'd been blind from birth. The only way that he could have sinned and caused his own blindness was if he had sinned before he was born, or if he had inherited some sort of sin from another, which seems to be what they believed, isn't it? In verse 34, you notice, you who were completely born in sin, you are teaching us. They must have believed that he was born in sin, and maybe that's how his blindness occurred. Yeah, of course, it couldn't have been his fault. He was born that way. Jesus said, neither he nor his parents sinned. People are born blind sometimes. You see, family, we live in the sin-cursed version of the perfect world. We don't live in the perfect world. It was perfect prior to Genesis chapter 3. Not anymore. People are born sick. Babies get cancer. People are born blind because we live. Now, I guess if you want to get really technical about it, sin would be the fault of all physical maladies if you traced it all the way back to Genesis, but not necessarily the sin of the person who is suffering. Sometimes it is. Sometimes bad choices will cause me to suffer. Sometimes bad choices of my parents or of someone else will cause me to suffer. But in the case of this man, boy, Americans don't like to hear this now. Hang on, put your seatbelt on. In the case of this man, there's nobody to blame. He was born blind. It happens. Sometimes you can't find somebody to sue. You know, sometimes you can't. It happened, Jesus said, it was no one's fault, but it was going to be used by Jesus to work the works of the Father. It just happened. Secondly, is this not the beggar? You know, this is such a phenomenon that the only way some of them thought they could explain it was it's not him, it's somebody else. This is such an amazing thing, a man born blind, and all of a sudden he can see, a grown man. Oh, no, it's not him, it's somebody like him. Well, he laid that to rest, didn't he? He said, it's me, this is me. I'm the one. His parents did too. So they didn't spend much time on that. His parents said, we know this is our son. We know he was born blind, verses 19 through 21. And then he keeps getting this question. He gets it in verse 10. He gets it in verse 15. He gets it on over in verse 26. How were your eyes opened? How were your eyes opened? And this is the actual purpose of the whole miracle. It is. How were your eyes opened? A man named Jesus did it. You better listen to him because he can open the eyes of the blind. That's the purpose of it. Why did they need to know that? To prove that he was the Messiah, to get to others to listen to him, to prove that he was from God, and it worked. Verses 31 through 33, on some of them it worked. The man who was healed realized that he was from God. To show that he, as he claimed in verse 5, is the light of the world. And as was already mentioned, one of the purposes for this miracle was to produce faith in you and me all these years later. And it works, doesn't it? There's no way that this could have been a farce. They saw the man begging. His parents knew it was him. And so the three questions, three observations. He was born blind. This is unique because of the 6 examples of Jesus healing the blind, if I'm not mistaken, this was the only one that it says he was born that way. Now, I don't know if the others were, but it seems that this is the only one. Anthropon ek genethes tuflon, man born without sight. Never had been able to see. He was born that way. A second unique observation is, this is not working, guys. Did I accidentally turn it off? Nope. There you go. A second observation is a lesson about the Sabbath. One of the things that they were having trouble with was he did this on the Sabbath. Now, I read this somewhere in some secular thing, and you can take this, and if you're a senior citizen, 74 cents, and get you a cup of coffee at McDonald's. But think about this. It is thought by some that the Pharisees had added so many laws to God's law that they had gotten to the point that in an arid, dusty climate, if you were to spit on the ground and move dirt, that constituted plowing. So on the Sabbath, you're not allowed to spit. If that were the case, Jesus directly violated that, didn't he? He made clay of spittle, and he did it on the Sabbath. Can't you see him down in the dirt mixing that up and picking it up, and those old Pharisees watching him and saying, he's working on the Sabbath. He can't possibly be from God. Jesus said, I'm the Lord of the Sabbath. In other places, I know what's supposed to be done on the Sabbath and what's not. I know what is allowed and what's not. Another place, he spat and cured deafness, Mark 7:33. He spat in one's eyes and cured blindness in Mark 8:23. But this is the only place that I can find that talks about him making dirt. And I think it was an obvious lesson to the Pharisees. I think he was saying, watch this, these Pharisees are going to get all torn up about this. And so he needed to do that to teach them a lesson about being good to people, even on the Sabbath. You guys, do you see a problem with this? I know you do. This man has never before seen, and a man comes along and makes spit and mud and cures him of blindness, and you got people standing over here on the side saying, yeah, that's what he did, but he did it on the Sabbath. Come on, people. He didn't violate anything. When I was growing up in the church, I've never known anything but the church my entire 67 years. And when I was growing up, nobody would mow their yard on Sunday afternoon who were members of the church, because they thought it was a violation of Christian Sabbath. I wonder if someone had healed someone miraculously on a Sunday afternoon, would our dear beloved old brethren, whom I love and hold in high esteem, would they have said, yeah, he did it, but, he did it on Sunday? Would that take away from the greatness of it? Saliva, dirt, obedience, grace. A Sabbath lesson in verse 6. A Sabbath lesson. Another thing that I observe is Jesus didn't call attention to himself. He didn't charge them, by the way. He didn't say, give me $1,000 and I'll give you an airplane. Give me that seed money and all that. And he did not stay around for undue attention. When the man was asked, where's that man that cured your blindness? He said, I don't know. I don't see him. He's not here. Where is he? He didn't ask the man for money. He didn't stay around for accolades. Let me tell you about accolades a little bit. I don't know much about it, but I'll tell you a little bit about it. They'll be patting you on the back and saying how great you are this minute, and tomorrow somebody's going to knock you off the headlights. Don't take that kind of stuff too seriously. Don't. My grandfather was an old country farmer up in central Kentucky. and he wasn't very well educated, but he taught me a lot of things. Some of them I can't tell you in church, but he taught me a lot of good things. And one of the things he used to say regularly was never bore people with tales of your own greatness. Now that's pretty good, isn't it? You don't have to be educated to know that, do you? Jesus didn't stay around for all that. Now later he looks this fella up when he finds out he was cast out of the synagogue, and he talks to him, and we'll see what the result of that was, though. But the next thing, guys, I'm not getting anything here. Click me one more time there. Not sure what happened. 3 points of application. Okay, we froze up. Just listen. The first thing I want you to do is strive to see people as people. Strive to see people as people. It's tough, isn't it? That guy that stands on the ramp with the sign that says we'll work for food, I've stopped and offered him a job. And he said, no, I'm doing okay right here. Strive to see people as people, souls to save. Every single one of them needs Jesus. What is it, about 8 billion now in the world? 8 billion people? 7.9 something. They were all over on Cedar Bluff this morning, I think. A lot of them were. Every single one of them made in the image of God. Every single one of them a soul that can potentially be taught the gospel. Who's supposed to be doing that? You and I are. Another point of application, physical maladies happen to everybody. You know that blonde-haired, blue-eyed family that you think is perfect and you'd like to be like, you know? You know that family that has the 2.5 kids and the 2 new cars and the big house and the perfect job? Let me give you a little secret about those folks. They got problems. They have problems. Everybody has problems. Everybody has difficulties. Everybody has physical, spiritual, financial, domestic difficulties. The third point of application. Jesus is the only cure for the real disease, spiritual blindness. You know anybody that's spiritually blind? Well, there are a lot of folks walking around with no goal, no purpose, except to eat, drink, survive. Jesus is the cure for their spiritual blindness. There are people who are wasting the most precious thing that they have. The only thing you have that's ever going to last forever is your soul. Jesus said, what would a man gain if he gained the whole world and lost his soul? Or what would he give in exchange for his soul? Well, people exchange their souls for some pretty cheap things sometimes. Spiritual blindness. Jesus is the cure for that. The Pharisees were spiritually blind. A man was healed, and all they could see was that it was done on the Sabbath. They could not see that the healer was from God. People leave the church and go back into the world. Let me hammer on this for just a few minutes. Could you imagine? Could you imagine, family? This man had been born blind and had never seen, and Jesus heals him. And could you imagine him looking around and saying, whoa, this sight business comes with responsibilities. Wow, I have to decide where I'm going now. Before, people just led me around. I have to feed myself. I didn't have to do that before. I want to go back to being blind, please. This is a scary thing, being able to see. Let me point out something else. Do you realize that this man saw his parents for the first time? And they threw him under the bus. The first time he had ever seen his parents. And they said, we don't know how he was healed. Ask him. We don't want anything to do with him. We don't want to be thrown out of the synagogue. First time he ever saw them. Could you imagine that happening? Well, no. I can't imagine that man choosing to go back and be blind, and yet people do it every day in the church. COVID, Satan has used COVID to get rid of a lot of our folks. We have to get them back. That's our job. That's what we need to be doing. You and I have been given the commission of putting clay on the spiritual eyes of the spiritually blind, taking the cure to them. A love for God, humility, desiring to know and to obey, trying to get them back. Lessons from the man born blind. Go, Jesus, when John the Baptist started having doubts in Matthew 11 in verse 4, he sent some people to ask Jesus, are you the one, or should I be looking for another? And Jesus said, you go tell John what you've seen. The blind see, the lame walk, the deaf hear, the lepers are cleansed, the eyes are opened, and all of those things are a result of the one, the right one, being here. I've enjoyed talking to you. I hope and pray that some of the things we've said this morning will encourage you to see those people out there as people. See them as lost souls. See them as those for whom you have the clay and the spittle for their eyes. Thank you.